My name is Andy Roberts and I'm Director of Product Development with Funky Finger Productions, which is basically anything from taking out the trash to designing mobile games. I was a writer for many years. When I was at school, I loved reading computer magazines and I just kind of fell in love with words and writing, and there was a particular computer magazine at the time, one of the best-selling magazines, and I would call them every day and send things in voluntarily. And back in those days, the relationship between video game development and magazine publishing, they were quite close. It was quite a symbiotic relationship. So it was a small kind of hop and skip to actually move into development. I knew a couple of brothers who were what we call bedroom programmers. They basically had computers in their bedroom and they would make computer games. So through the magazine that I was writing for, I got to know those guys and started swapping ideas and collaborating on the projects that they made. And that's basically how I fell into video game development. We made a couple of games, and literally at the point where the PC market kind of exploded with the release of Doom. So you're looking at maybe 1993. And then at that point, there was a whisper in the wind that the PlayStation was on its way. And we'd been working on 8-bit computers like the Commodore 64. So suddenly there was a huge quantum leap from working on an 8-bit machine to producing something like Doom on the PC or a fully fledged PlayStation game. So at that particular point, I took a job with Sony Entertainment. I realized that I couldn't make that leap on my own, so I joined Sony as a tester with the QA department, and this was just at the cusp, just as the PlayStation was coming to Europe, so it was a very exciting time. But I walked into a room and there were 50 PlayStations in the room, and I'd never seen anything like it before. So I worked for them for about a year as a tester, which is a fantastic way into the industry, because you gain a lot of experience about the business side of making games, and the fact that games aren't all fun and games. There is a serious side, the fact that games have bugs and those bugs need to be found, because if they go out with bugs in them, then that can cost the manufacturer and the publisher, thousands, millions of dollars. So working for Sony was a really good experience, working for a fantastic corporation that felt a bit more like a family than a corporate entity. And from there, I managed to set up a beta department. So rather than just test the games, we actually had publishers towards the end of my time at Sony actually sending in their games asking for feedback, because we had so many testers with so many great ideas. So a lot of the testers who worked for Sony, including myself, we got to work on some very high-profile games at the time. I worked on the original Crash Bandicoot in particular. We got our name in the credits. We felt like superstars. And from there, it was a very simple step to build on that experience and move into video game design. I think maybe a couple of places in the world that possibly had some courses that maybe tied in to the skills that you would need. Certainly, when the PlayStation came along, everything was written in C++. So you could go to school and learn C++, but the ins and outs of games programming were still kind of shrouded in mystery. And I think over time, it wasn't really until the late 90s that various courses started popping up, mostly in North America, actually. And it just kind of gained traction from there. But now there's dozens of opportunities, there's dozens of courses out there. You're kind of, if you want to get into the video game industry, you're spoiled for choice, really. There are many different ways. I don't think there's one particular way in. I came via a very kind of circuitous route. Some people end up in the industry just through blind luck. Sometimes it's who you know, what you know. Sometimes people start off, just writing video game manuals and just end up as part of the furniture and end up, moving into other roles. I think it doesn't hurt to get some kind of qualification in the industry that you're interested in. Certainly, I would say if you do go to school and say you were studying art and animation, or you were studying games programming, I think that would only be one component. I think the other component is your passion. And I would say if you go to school all day, then when you come home, continue to make games. Don't just switch off when you leave school. Keep making games, because the experience is invaluable, and the more times you can go through that process of creating a game, taking something from start to finish, the more that will help you out later in your career. I think I've always been creative, and I've always wanted to do 5 things at once. When I was young, I loved to draw, but I also loved to build. I wanted to be a carpenter at one point. I wanted to have an electronics store at one point. I wanted to spray trucks for a living. It's almost a kind of OCD kind of creative urge that I have. I like to kind of stay nimble and move from one thing to the next, and I like to learn as much as I can about different creative endeavors. So I think video games appeal to me because with writing for computer magazines and so forth, it's just you and a keyboard and an idea. And the path is very linear. You know that there's a finished article at the end of it, and you've just got to traverse that path. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes you're just pacing up and down, drinking 1,000 cups of tea, banging your head against the wall, trying to get those words out. But with video games, there are so many different problems that have to be solved creatively, and there are so many different facets to building a game that I think that's why it appealed to me. It's the fact that you could, try this thing, and then you're onto this thing, and then you're onto that thing. The path it's more like the branches of a tree. All the different tasks that come together at the end, and all the different problems that need to be solved. Again, it's good to play games. It's good to have that passion for games, to play a breadth of games, from like early Nintendo to PlayStation 4, Xbox One, that kind of stuff. It's good to know the history. It's good to know the different genres. But a passion for playing games isn't the same as a passion for making games. The creative process with making a game is at times it can be very intense. At times it can be problem after problem after problem, and it can be just a list of 100 problems that you have to solve before you get to the point where you're satisfied, you're exhilarated, you're excited about what you're creating. So the creativity is the most important thing, and really we use that excitement that you get when you're playing a great game. We use that to fuel our creativity. We don't make games generally for other people. You make the kind of game that you would want to play, because only you will know when you play your own game, when you feel that excitement, that's the point where you know you've struck gold, basically. It's satisfying, certainly, but I think sometimes a little bit of time has to pass after it's been released before you can look back and say, yeah, that was great, because there is a lot of problem solving, and it can be quite intense at times. And like, some people compare making a game to having a baby, because you go through this long gestation cycle. There's a kind of rough idea of what's going to happen at the end. It never quite goes how you want. And then the day after that the game is released, you feel exhausted, because there's always, crunch at the end, just trying to cram everything in and get everything done. So it's a lot of hard work, but once the dust settles, it's an amazing feeling to take an idea, to look back at the seed of the idea that you had and see how it came to fruition is fantastic. I think the only sad part about mobile games and games that you would play online or download online, I almost weep for the next generation of game developers, because I always got a lot of satisfaction going into a store and seeing the game on the shelf. That was kind of the ultimate prize, to go in there and see people pick up the game, and you'd kind of just stand there in awe that something that you'd worked on was on the shelf. But I mean, challenges aside, hard work aside, there's no other industry that I would rather be in. If the creative urge is there, I think you have to listen to it and you have to obey it. one of the best examples would be Angry Birds. So the story goes, they had released a series of apps, and Angry Bird was kind of their last shot. They said, well, let's release this and we'll see if it makes some money. If it doesn't, we'll pack up shop, we'll do something else. And that was the big hit for them. And I think although everybody dreams of having the next big hit, the next Angry Birds, the next Candy Crush, it's not always possible. But if you can just have fun making games, if you can make games that some people are going to enjoy, not every game has to be a blockbuster in order for you to feel that you've done a worthwhile job. I've worked on games that took in excess of 3 years. I've worked on games that took, I don't know, about 9 weeks is the shortest project I ever worked on. But every single game was fun in its own way, was worthwhile in its own way. I don't think there's a project that I've worked on where I thought, well, that wasn't worth it because it didn't really sell too much. It's what you bring to the process and what you gain in terms of experience. I think that's the most important. I think certainly playing games is useful, doing your research. I would read more about games and how they're made rather than play them. There are some great resources out there. There's a website called Gamma Sutra, which is all about the business of making games. So there's lots of post-mortem articles on there where developers talk about the development process, the things that went right, the things that went wrong. Learning software is a vital step. When we get a resume, when we see software skills in place, that's a huge bonus. And there are so many free versions or trial versions of software, particularly if you're an artist. Maybe Maya or Photoshop would be fantastic programs to learn. And also writing skills are important, communication skills. It's one thing to think of an idea, but sometimes a key part of the process is to put that down into words. So, getting yourself a word processor, writing your own game design documents, that kind of thing. Just start somewhere. Pick a tool off the shelf like Unity or GameMaker, get a trial version, just start playing around. Even if nothing comes of that, the experience and the process will really kind of, help you build those skills that you'll need later on. I have always maintained that you should follow your heart. And if you're passionate and you're creative, if you have ideas where you're desperate to kind of realize that idea, then that's the industry for you. If you're creative and you became an accountant, no offense to accountants, but it's not the line of work for you, and your brain would always be going 100 miles an hour. And I found that, during my career, there are times where I've done odd jobs here and there, and the more mundane the job, the more I would find myself thinking about what I wanted to do, which was creating something in some way. So, you should always listen to your parents, obviously, because they have lots of wisdom and kind of sage advice. But certainly, if you feel that passion, if you feel that creative urge, you should definitely find an outlet for that. And maybe going to school and exploring those options might be the first step. It's lucrative. If you accidentally have a sleeper hit, if you create the next Minecraft, you're going to end up with 2 billion in the bank. But that's, a 1 in a million shot. As you build experience, as soon as you get over the 5-year mark, perhaps, and you gain sufficient experience and skills as you rise up through the ranks, you can expect your salary to go up. It's quite a well-paid industry to begin with. But it's not all about the money. If you're in it just for the money, there are probably easier ways to make a good salary, because if you were motivated by money rather than the passion for doing it, you'd probably find it quite draining. So it does pay well, but it does take a while to get there too. There are certain provinces where you would expect there to be quite a straightforward path. But there isn't, and PEI, you're spoiled for choice. If you want to be an artist, you can go to Holland College and study there. If you fancy being a games programmer, you can study computer science at UPI and then take a games specialization course. So the outlets are there. Some jobs in the industry are kind of nebulous, and it's difficult to find training or courses for them. But certainly on PEI, you could take either of those two routes if you were a programmer or an artist. If you weren't quite sure if you wanted to go the design or production route, there are companies like Sculpin QA who are continually taking on testers and testing staff. So that's a very good stepping stone into the industry. And of course, there's quite a few different companies here. There's Funky Finger, of course there's EA Games in Charlottetown, and there's a number of other smaller studios. So, I mean, we're not quite on the Vancouver scale of things, but in terms of, you know, the best places in Canada to get a start in the industry, we're certainly in the top 5. Well, I never thought I'd be doing it 25 years into the future. Back when I started, we never quite knew where things were going to end. There had been a computer crash in, I think, 1982, where the industry was kind of decimated and then it rose from the ashes. So I think everybody was always expecting that to happen again, but it just grew and grew and grew. And now it's not such a niche industry. Now there are bigger companies, there are more people working on games than ever before. I think you can build a solid career. There are people that I know that came into the industry as an artist and they're still an artist and they just enjoy their art and they enjoy what they're doing. There are other people I know came in as testing staff and now they're CEOs. So the path is really yours to choose once you get into the industry. Certainly software skills are huge. Anyone with a graphic design background would be, you know, well placed to work in the industry. There's a lot of what they call UI/UX designers. It's a very specialized role which has just kind of come to the fore over the last 2 or 3 years, designing menus and interfaces, and that's very much a specialized skill. So, you know, a grounding in graphic design would serve you well. I mean, certainly, I think the software side of it is the biggest place where you can devote your time and energy, is to learning as many different software programs as you can. I think the biggest lesson I learned was a piece of advice I was given. It was cut early and cut deep, because generally speaking, when you're designing a game, you have grand ideas, and the ideas are very free-flowing in the beginning. And your ideas are like children, so you don't really want to drop an idea. It's very easy to fall in love with them, and that can cause issues further down the line. So I think there may be certain points where I would go back. If I was going to go back in time, it would be just kind of reel back some of my ideas a little bit, because games can very easily slip and take way longer than they should, and you can spend a lot of time investing in an idea which was so inconsequential, you know, in the final product. So I don't regret any of the games that I've worked on. They've all taught me different things, and every game is different, and every game teaches you, you know, that you don't really know that much. They always present a brand new set of problems. You think you would be older and wiser, but they're very, very different beasts, which is what makes it so interesting. So yeah, I think I would go back and I would tap myself on the shoulder and just say, just reel that idea in just a little bit. I think the sense of accomplishment really is having an idea and then seeing the finished product and going through that creative journey, because there are compromises to be made, but you always seem to end up at the right spot. You always seem to end up with the right game. I think a lot of authors talk about how they'll conceptualize a character and they'll have very specific things in mind for that character, but then the character begins to write itself and takes a behavior on of its own. And video games are very much the same thing. You can very much look at your initial design and the finished game and say to yourself, I didn't think it was going to turn out like that, but it's usually better than you could have anticipated.